Our first group of session 2 is mine. My students have been working with Sports for Nature, and I'd now like to welcome up Curran to present.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Curran Murphy, and tonight I'll be presenting the Blue and Green Game Plan, a strategic playbook for advancing water stewardship and enhancing biodiversity in sports. I'd first like to introduce our team. Our faculty advisor is Chandler Precht, our manager is Data Mons, and our deputy is John McGlynn. For tonight's lineup, I'd first like to introduce our client and give you a little bit of context about the issue at hand. I'll be then moving into our methodology and approach about how we develop this game plan. And finally, I'll be touching upon a few of the recommendations we will be giving to our client. So the issue for us really boiled down to how does sports interact with water and biodiversity? And in the past, this has been a mismanaged relationship, as you can tell by all these titles on the screen. One headline I'd like to particularly highlight is the Tropicana Field, home to the Tampa Bay Rays. This stadium suffered over $20 million in damage after Hurricane Milton came through, highlighting how changing climate has caused increased intensity and frequency of these storms, creating a tangible impact on the sports that we love today. Our client, Sports for Nature, or SFRN for short, is looking to address these issues that were highlighted in the previous slide. They have teamed up with international partners such as the International Olympic Committee and have garnered support from about 100 different signatories, which are comprised of different sporting venues, organizations, and clubs. Their mission is to Their mission is to deliver transformative action for nature across sports by 2030 and beyond. Sports for Nature believes that every sport is a water sport. And what they mean by that is in some way, shape, or form, every sport has some use case or relationship with water. So whether you're on a boat, rowing on a lake, or you're a soccer player that needs to water your pitch, you have a use and a relationship with water, and it's your responsibility to manage that relationship going forward. Now, the signatories come from a variety of different backgrounds, and it is an ever-growing list. In order to tailor our recommendations to maximize the impact while still reaching the broadest audience possible, we decided to group the signatories into 4 key categories. These categories are mega sports and temporary events. Think FIFA World Cup, the Olympics. Next, we have non-nature-based sports. Think of basketball, baseball, even swimming because it takes place in a pool, it's in a stadium. Nature-based sports, skiing, biking, running, and then sports in water, sailing, boating, power boating. It's important to remember that the recommendations we are making are specifically geared towards these signatories, and these signatories also helped us generate these recommendations as they played a key role during our interviewing process, which I'll touch upon in just a minute. Now, we were tasked by Sports for Nature to create the Blue and Green Game Plan. This is a game plan with actionable recommendations for SFRN signatories to preserve natural resources, primarily focusing on water and biodiversity, keeping aligned with Sports for Nature's framework principles. Now, Sports for Nature has 4 key principles that they abide by. Principle 1, protect nature. Principle 2, restore and regenerate nature. Principle 3, reduce risks in supply chain. And Principle 4, to educate and inspire. We use this framework as a structure and a guideline for generating our recommendations, and in doing so, we ensured that every recommendation we made was closely aligned with Sports for Nature's core values. The methodology for developing this game plan began with extensive research on case studies and doing literature review. We really wanted to understand where the research currently was and how we could progress it forward. We then conducted key stakeholder interviews to get anecdotal evidence as to what has worked and not worked in the past. And then we moved to quantitative data, things like global climate trends, water stress, and species populations, and used geographical information systems like GIS to then visualize that data. The culmination of all this research allowed us to create robust recommendations within our playbook for the signatories. Now, along the way, there are many challenges and hurdles that we came across, quantifying the impact of a specific recommendation or determining the cost associated with it, and even scaling our recommendations to an equitable level, knowing that the signatories come from a variety of different backgrounds. However, our team worked diligently to address these issues, and we were still able to come together and create a complete document. Now, I'm going to be highlighting one case study here to show how we would take a case study, take the key points from it, and then formulate it into a recommendation. The Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, is home to the Falcons, and this stadium decided to use water-conscious infrastructure in their design by implementing an 860,000-gallon tank. This tank collected runoff water and rainwater, which was then used to water the fields, wash the equipment, and wash the stadium as a whole. This ultimately reduced the stadium's demand on the municipal water supply. Case studies like this show how water-conscious infrastructure can actually reduce demand, and we were able to translate that into recommendations for the signatories. Now, each category of signatories got their own recommendation matrix. This recommendation matrix was designed to help them navigate the various recommendations that we were offering them. On the y-axis, we have effort, which was determined based on the financial and human capital required to achieve that recommendation. And on the x-axis, we have impact, which was a more heuristic approach where we use surveys and use a rating system from 1 to 5 to determine the relative impact that that recommendation would have. Within the recommendation matrix, we have 4 key categories, 4 key quadrants. This is resource stressors. These are recommendations that do require a lot of resources and might not have an immediate impact, but are still very important to the long-term sustainability goals set by these teams. We then have the large project quadrant, which are projects that will really move the needle in the right direction, but do require a lot of effort to get done. We have small tasks, which aren't the most effective, but are simple and easy to do, so we want to highlight those for the smaller signatories. And finally, we have quick wins, which are the golden spot. This is the target that we really want to look for, which are low-effort recommendations that have impacts that will last a long time to benefit both water and biodiversity. So I'll now be going through the different categories of signatories that we have, and then highlighting 2 of the recommendations we're giving them. It's important to note that we did have over a dozen for each category, but we're only highlighting 2 to give you an idea of a recommendation that might fall in each quadrant. So these aren't necessarily the most impactful recommendations we'll be talking about. So for the first category, we have mega sports and temporary events. The first recommendation we have falls under Principle 2, and this recommendation is to develop reforestation initiatives for emission offsetting and biodiversity enhancement. Examples of this are like the Olympic forest, which actually was able to sequester a ton of carbon and was able to provide critical habitats for various species that were displaced during certain events. This did take a lot of money and effort to do, which is why it falls under the large project quadrant. The next recommendation we have for megasports and temporary events falls under Principle 3, which is to implement sustainable food policies. Food is a very important part of these events, and understanding where your food is being sourced from is very important, especially regarding your supply chain. By switching to sustainably sourced foods, you can have more transparency about the impacts that you're having on the upstream regarding biodiversity and water. Next, we have non-nature-based sports. The first recommendation we have for them is falls under Principle 2, and that's to install green roofs on sporting facilities. Typically, sporting facilities are in very urban, dense areas, so by introducing a little bit of green and biodiversity, you can create a habitat for birds, insects, and key pollinators, which can promote a lot of positive biodiversity repercussions after that. The next recommendation we have falls under Principle 4. This recommendation is to invest in merchandise that educates fans. During these events, fans love to buy jerseys, t-shirts, bobbleheads, snow globes, all these different types of items, which actually has a lot of real estate to put sustainable messaging on it. This is a very simple task to do. You're basically putting stickers on certain products, but you can actually spread the message and get awareness out to different spectators. Next, we will be looking at the nature-based sports. The first recommendation we have is to promote and support global biodiversity legislation. We truly believe that policymakers are key to making sure we can protect critical habitats and protect special water sources. It only takes a few members of an organization to create conversations with policymakers, and if those policies do go through, they can have huge lasting effects. Next, for our next recommendation, it falls under Principle 4. This recommendation is to implement comprehensive waste reduction programs and recycling programs. During the Tour de France, for example, small little trash bags were handed out, and spectators were encouraged to pick up litter while they watched the race. This turned out to be a very successful initiative, as spectators got really into it and were picking up a ton of litter, and all it required was the venue to hand out little trash bags. And finally, we have sports and water. The first recommendation we have under this category falls under Principle 1, and it is to report wildlife sightings. In 2016, over 100 endangered manatees were hit during powerboat racing. By just simply reporting where these manatees or different species are, venue hosts can change the route of which the boats are being raced on to avoid potential collisions. And then finally, for our last recommendation that we're highlighting tonight, it falls under Principle 3 to use eco-friendly materials. This can be a very expensive endeavor, but because sports and water typically use very complex equipments like boats and they have very complex supply chains, by switching to eco-friendly materials, you get more transparency on understanding where your impacts are, again, upstream on biodiversity and water. So going forward, we really hope that Sports for Nature takes our playbook and passes it along to the current signatories and future signatories. We hope that signatories really adopt our recommendations and integrate it within their sports and their venues. And by doing so, they can mitigate key risks associated with biodiversity and water. By doing that, they can preserve the sports that we love for generations and generations to come, which is ultimately the goal of sustainability. We hope that we can educate people and teach them that every sport is truly a water sport and can use the lens of Sports for Nature. And the sooner we can pass it along, the sooner we can start driving actionable change for a better tomorrow. Thank you very much, and I'll now be fielding any questions that you may have.
Thank you for the presentation. It's always great to see how projects progress after the midterm. I had a question about how you judged in what quadrant certain things fell. For example, I saw that offsetting emissions by supporting reforestation was located in the high effort quadrant, but to my knowledge, there are organizations that provide that and it merely needs to be purchased. Green roofs on stadia runs into all kinds of structural problems because stadia roofs are long span roofs. They're very deep. It might be better to put PVs on it, et cetera. So just from my limited understanding, I was curious about the metrics.
Thank you very much for your question. I really appreciate it. Basically, the metrics really did come from looking at the variety of different solutions we did have. And we had to look at the specific signatories that we were thinking would be using this. Again, like we would like to make the most general recommendations that we could, but certain signatories did have certain constraints. And again, we're like for mega sports, for example, where we had the reforestation initiative. Those are events like FIFA World Cup and the Olympics, like really big events that are spending boatloads of money and usually doing it themselves and not necessarily always going to a third party to just buy offsets. They'll sometimes really like to do those projects themselves and have control over it. Again, with the roofs, we looked into green roofs mainly. We did look into solar and different ones, but our project is mainly focused on biodiversity and water, which is why we gravitated to our highlighting green roof as one of our recommendations. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much. I was wondering, because biodiversity metrics can be so complicated and there's so many different things that you could measure to assess impact, how did you guys decide what you would be looking at in terms of biodiversity impact?
Totally. Thank you very much for the question. We first started off, this was actually a big challenge that we had a lot of discussion about. But what we ultimately came to is we developed 5 key questions about longevity, about who it would impact, communities, and all that for a holistic approach, and then gave it a heuristic rating from 1 to 5. This was also in context of the other recommendations, but because it's, biodiversity is not something you can just pick up and put somewhere else and say that they're equal contributions, we did have to resort to a more heuristic approach. But yes, we did have a strict questionnaire that we basically follow along to determine what the impact would be.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, can you give an example? How did you incorporate the GIS analysis to how did you use that to come up with your recommendations?
Totally.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So first of all, the easiest thing that we did, because we didn't want to get too complicated at first, was we simply just started mapping out different arena locations and popular stadiums throughout Europe and America. We then took it a step further by mapping on global climate trends, water-stressed regions. A lot of this data was available on ArcGIS online through public resources. And through the culmination of these different data layers, we were able to kind of find certain regions that may be at more risk for hosting certain types of events. We also worked closely with the WWF. They had a lot of great data and really helped us out by providing in-depth and specific data, whether it was for just bird species or general species. They had a ton of data. So we really relied on them to help us look at the data and also understand it as well.